Well, we are at the presidency today, and we are in the offices of the man who has been tasked with keeping the communications of the government ticking. Typically, what you would have had is someone who is responsible for communications at the presidency. But this time around, because of the extensive restructuring and resets, he would have to operate from here, not as information minister, but as the person responsible for the president's communication and also the person responsible for the entire government machinery's communication. And unfortunately for him, he doesn't have the extensive numbers that even the New Patriotic Party had. So he's doing quite a one-man's job with some small assistance. In fact, he has somebody who has been in the media for so long to help him. Well, our guest is FELIX KWAKYE OFOSU, who is Minister of State in charge of government communications. Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Senator.
Yeah. I hope you're well.
Well, by God's grace, I'm trotting on.
First of all, how are you finding the work?
Oh, it's a pressure cooker environment. I've always been aware of that. As you may be aware, I had a previous stint within government's communication setup as a deputy minister for information first and then deputy minister for communications. So it's not an entirely new environment, except that now additional responsibility has been brought to bear. And then because of the urgent need for downsizing government and restructuring government in order to ensure that we do more with less, the numbers have been reduced substantially. That perhaps ups the ante quite a bit. But I think that we are holding up, and we have demonstrated that you don't need a legion of people in order to be effective and efficient. So it's not been rosy, but I think that we are putting in the best we can in order to ensure that government communications is handled effectively and that we remain accountable and transparent to the people of Ghana.
And I wonder how you're doing this, because I realize that typically it is either yourself or Shamima who is doing the talking, which is quite a small group to deal with, because now most of your communicators who are working between opposition, most of them have taken other jobs. How are you managing?
Well, I think that the vision of His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama is to ensure that, as I indicated, we do more with less. And that is defining efficiency, essentially. What has happened is that there's myself, there's Shamima, there's a Vice President's communications outfit headed by Amaprat. And then I have one or two other people. Recently, Vegetotu, who is a vastly experienced media person, has been added to the team. So we do our best to manage government information. You do know that whereas the system and infrastructure that the SWL Information Ministry no longer exists, and so those numbers have not come to play, we still do have the PR arm of government, which is the Information Services Department. The Information Services Department has a phalanx of PR professionals who are spread across the various ministries, departments, and agencies. And so they are primarily responsible for managing the communications of the respective agencies. I play a coordinating role, ensuring that the policy regarding government communication is effectively administered. So that is how the structure works. The superstructure is thin, but there is a well-established system in place. The ISD has been in operation for in excess of 80 years. So they have tremendous experience in the management of government communications. And through that, we've been able to hold the fort up until this time. I think that the idea was to ensure that we don't waste public resources on large numbers. In the past, if you look at the numbers that the NPP operated with, you could clearly see that there was a lot of waste. Here alone, they had 28 people managing government information. If you went to the Ministry of Information, there were 76 people. So when you put that together, you are talking close to 106 people doing the job that about 8 of us now are doing. And I think that that demonstrates that there's room for innovation, there's room for improvement. And these days too, there are all manner of ICT options. Technology has evolved, and so one is able to do a lot more once technology comes to play. We have a system that enables us to collate information about government activities in real time. And through that, we are then able to distill through what the most important issues are and how effectively and quickly, we need to disseminate same to the people of Ghana. So we have a structure that works. And of course, as time goes on, we will try to improve upon it to deliver the services that are required of us.
A big part of that will be social media.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Social media is the in thing now. In the past, in this my position, if I wanted to put out a statement, I would have to draft it and then send you a physical copy by fax. That was the technology at the time. And then if you were gracious enough, you read it on your program. Then it evolved to email. So your station and other stations had email addresses, which we had. Then we put all of them together. So I'll put the statement there and email it. Sometimes when you are unfortunate or unlucky, some stations do not receive it. So you receive complaints about stations not receiving it. And even if they receive it, it is entirely at their discretion. They may choose to disregard it based on their own editorial policy. But now social media is a leveler. So all I need to do is to put the information on my social media handles, and within a split second, it goes viral, depending on how many followers I have and how many other people follow my account. So this morning, for instance, I put out a statement on the arrival of the Indian Prime Minister on a state visit to Ghana from 3rd to 4th July. And it has gone viral. All the stations have had to tell stories from that particular statement. So it means that social media has given us power that we did not have. And it is a way that we can disseminate government information effectively, timelessly, and quickly. What it also does is that it removes the filter that those of you in the media provide. Because, for instance, if a statement is put out, you don't put out the statement as you have put it out. You write a story out of it. And in writing the story, you may put in your own words. You may put in your own interpretations and meanings. Sometimes it can have the effect of distorting the true import and meaning of the story or statement that we've put out. But when you put it on social media, it is unfiltered. Everybody sees it as you have put it down. And therefore, it limits one's ability to put a spin on what we are meant to say. So it has very, very useful sides that we are exploring in our work. Of course, we all know that it also has its unfortunate downsides.
Yeah, and that was what I was coming to.
There are those who seek to exploit it for ulterior reasons. Others distort information, they spread fake news. And because everything you put there goes viral instantly, sometimes it's quite difficult to keep track and reverse the harm that the false information has made. But I think that as it evolves, the social media companies themselves are taking steps to limit the spread of fake news. And we also have a system through which we check it quickly and put out correct information if we have to. So that is how it's been going so far.
Well, then there's the matter of, because recently, I think one of the things that you've had to respond to has been the Article 146 proceedings that's been brought against the Chief Justice. In fact, you've been cautious in communicating on that matter, even though many things have happened. Why did you feel there was a need to speak this time around and respond to the Chief Justice?
Information filtered in that the Chief Justice was going to make a statement on the matter. Speculation was rife as to what was going to be the subject matter of her statement and what issues she was going to raise. It was our duty to keep our antennas up, monitor the situation, and to the extent that processes at a point involved the president, we needed to look out for anything that involved or came close to drawing in the president. And if we thought that that was going to create avenue for misinformation and the dissemination of inaccurate information, it was necessary to address it. It is true that largely she raised issues about the committee's work and its processes. If she had kept her views to the work of the committee alone, then there would have been no need for us to speak, because we don't speak for the committee. I don't speak for the committee. If the committee is minded, we may have systems that they will use to respond to same. But there were things that she said, even if they were veiled, that if not responded to in a timely fashion, could create some misimpressions about the role of the president and his desire to stick to the constitutional provisions as captured in Article 146 of the Constitution. There were two things that stood out. The first was the claim of some political agenda or vendetta against her. Now, it was important to immediately clarify that. Otherwise, persons who are not familiar with the processes, some of whom may even be foreigners, people who are not Ghanaians. Because indeed, in the course of this matter, I've had to speak on international media, the BBC, Deutsche Welle, and others, all of whom have taken interest in it. And for obvious reasons, the Chief Justice is a high-profile office, a prominent office, and therefore you would expect that level of both local and international interest. But there are those who may not have context, and so may take things at face value. And therefore, if you don't quickly respond to assertions that are not accurate, it may have the effect of informing opinions that may not bode well for the country's image and the government's image. So it was necessary to correct it. So I had to immediately clarify that there was no political agenda. The president was sworn in, incidentally, by the Chief Justice himself. When he was sworn in, he swore an oath to abide by and respect the Ghanaian Constitution. The day that the president does anything contrary to the Constitution, his position will become untenable, and he would have to be removed from office. So guided by that principle, President Mahama has acted in strict conformity and accordance with the Constitution. The Constitution is clear in Article 146 that if somebody presents a petition on the Chief Justice's conduct and demands her removal, a certain process has to be undertaken. And we've gone through that process over and over and over again in the course of this matter. So perhaps I wouldn't bore you with it. The president has done everything that the Constitution stipulates. So indeed, you would notice that there has been a lot of commentary on this matter, but nobody during this commentary has been able to say that President Mahama has violated Article 146 or any of its subsections. Nobody has been able to do that, including the Chief Justice himself. Nobody has been able to do that. So when the Chief Justice alleges a political agenda, which implies then that the president is minded to act a certain way because of political reasons, it simply becomes untenable. It is not a justifiable conclusion to reach, especially in the absence of any credible evidence. The president received petitions from 3 separate quarters, and he acted as the Constitution says he should. If that claim of political agenda is based on past criticism of the judiciary, I don't think that is tenable either. Because there will never be a time in our country where judicial practice will not come under scrutiny. All public office holders, including the president, come under scrutiny daily. This morning on your program, I'm sure people called in or sent messages expressing varied views about the president. Some criticized him, some may be mild, some may be harsh. Others too may agree with him and lavish praise on him. The Speaker of Parliament, I'm a member of Parliament also, MPs. Every day we come under criticism for various reasons. The judiciary, there will never be a time when somebody will go to court and lose the case and not express misgivings about the outcome. It is natural that if people feel aggrieved about the work of public officials, they ask him. So we in the NDC, who believe that for decades we have been unfairly treated by the Ghanaian judiciary, and some of our members have been targets of judicial practices and pronouncements that we believe were unfair and unjustified, have every right, like any other Ghanaian, to express their view and disagree virulently with the judiciary. And we have done that. It does not mean then that simply because we disagreed with the judiciary in the past, then we have to do anything about the judiciary. Not at all. Indeed, NDC has been in power for 16 out of the 34 years or 32 years that the 1992 Constitution has been in existence. And on all those occasions, nobody can point to anything that we've done that closely resembles interfering with judicial. President Rawlings was the one who superintended the transition from military rule to democratic rule. So he had the benefit of appointing the Supreme Court judges in the initial stage of the Fourth Republic. But you recall that even when he was president, almost all the prominent political cases were lost by the government of the day. The GBC case, the June 4th, 31st December case, the case that AKUFO-ADDO took to court, or is it JH Mesa? It escapes me exactly who took it to court, but about how ministers have to be re-vetted if they are reappointed and all of that. The government of the day lost all of that. There were cases that Shraj looked into which compelled him to dismiss a number of ministers. And here was a former military strongman who had transitioned into a democratic leader. And there were some who could have said that, but he could have strong-armed the judiciary and disregarded them and done what he pleased, especially when he had appointed all of them. And yet we lost these cases. Life didn't come to an end. We moved on as a country. Since then, all chief justices have been appointed by the NPP. All the chief justices who have come since 2001 have been appointed by the NPP. A huge number of judges have been appointed by the NPP. And there are times when we have felt aggrieved the way that the judiciary has handled matters involving the NDC or its members. But I don't think that constitutes proof of a political agenda. A political agenda will come to play if you find that the law has been violated willfully in order to target anybody. But in this instance, that allegation cannot hold in the face of verifiable facts. So it was important to correct that. Then the second issue, for which reason I needed to intervene that quickly, was this attempt to draw some linkage between the current process taking place at a venue, the AKUFO Lodge, and the most unfortunate, most regrettable killings of 3 High Court judges and military officers. So now the truth is that not even the most tenuous linkage can be drawn between the two incidents.
Not at all.
Absolutely. The Chief Justice basically created the impression that AKUFO Lodge is some intimidating, foreboding stronghold of government or some dungeon where people are mistreated. And therefore, she says she has relations with Major Aqua, who was one of the unfortunate victims of that dastardly and cowardly act. I didn't know that until the day that she spoke. Who would have known any familiar relations that she had? As far as I know, she was a Miss Saki before she married. She was not a Miss Aqua or anything. So how would anybody have known about this familiar relation? In any event, AKUFO Lodge, and she said that AKUFO Lodge was the place where a significant part of the planning for the murders of the judges took place. That is not correct. The only mention of AKUFO Lodge anywhere near the killings of the judges was when Amatekwe, it is in the SIB report, Amatekwe alleged, even then it was only an allegation, even if we were to accept it to be true. He said that he met Captain Chikata in front of AKUFO Lodge in his car to discuss a certain matter relating to the investigation into the murder. How does somebody sitting in a car in front or near a house constitute reason why somebody says she will be intimidated if she enters that house to do official business? AKUFO Lodge is a state facility. It's a state facility. And it is essentially a guest house. That houses high profile, high ranking officials who visit Ghana. Indeed, I am told that perhaps the most high ranking personality who has been there is Pope John Paul II, who came here in 1980. That's where he stayed. So a place where a whole pope can stay can certainly not be an intimidating, unfriendly environment where a chief justice cannot go. And the committee that was looking into the matter said that to preserve the dignity of the chief justice herself, they didn't want her walking in and out of the judicial complex where she used to rule the roost and superintended all the people that would be part of this. So seeing her go in and out there does not project the best image for her. And that despite the petitions, her sanctity must be respected and protected. So they needed a place that was conducive to this sort of work. That would also ensure that unauthorized persons do not come and create disruptions for the process. And indeed, the place was set up with every facility. There is actually a holding place for the Chief Justice herself, where she waits pending the beginning of the proceedings. Well appointed, well furnished, to standards that everybody would accept, meets her status in society. A place where the committee members also can recede and confer. And it has every amenity required for a process like this. As for the security arrangements, it is necessary. But the Chief Justice is Chief Justice, so she sits periodically at the Supreme Court to hear cases. So now if you go to the Supreme Court today, you will go through rigorous checks, starting with the metal detector, to ensure that you don't take any unauthorized material into the building. There are some courts where you will not be allowed to enter with the phone. I used to go to court a lot when the AKUFO-ADDO case was on. And at the entrance of the court complex, there is a metal detector. Some of the security officials actually have handheld metal detectors to scan you, to ensure that you don't take any unauthorized materials in there. And everybody is subject. So she was Chief Justice. She was in the Supreme Court. People of all caliber, including high-ranking government officials who had cases before her, went through these checks. So why is an impression being created that she is somehow immune from the same checks that everybody goes through? The sittings are in camera. It means that it should not be recorded, or nothing from that setting should come out until the committee itself puts out whatever conclusions they have reached. Now, to avoid that, people who go in, they must go through a routine security procedure. There's nothing intimidating about that. I'm a minister of state. If I go to court on any matter, I will go through checks. I cannot construe that to mean disrespect for me or my person. And it is not a process outlined for the person of this Chief Justice. Everybody going through the process goes through that. So it is most unfortunate to paint this rather inaccurate picture of the ADDO Lodge and the systems that are put in place to facilitate the work of the committee in the manner that she did. So these are the two reasons why it was necessary to instantly correct that misimpression so that people who do not have context don't imbibe information that is false and then use that as a basis to pass judgment on what has happened so far. But as for the specific claims about the committee, it is up to the committee to respond if they so wish. Of course, one would have thought that the appropriate forum would be the law court. And indeed, I understand that after the press conference, she's filed another process. And one would have thought that that process would capture these. And it's also worth noting that at least 4 different court hearings have taken place on this matter. I think the first 2 or 3 involved, what do you call it? Of course, people have even questioned their political affiliation. How is it that they are the ones saying? But anyway, it is their right to do so. And then the Chief Justice herself. On all occasions, the Chief Justice's own peers, who until recently she used to adjudicate cases with, have dismissed the petitions. These are her peers, and these are not people who have only recently assumed office. Indeed, not one of them was appointed by or has been appointed by this government. In fact, the recently approved Supreme Court judges are yet to even be sworn in, so they've not taken office yet. But all the people who have sat on the cases that the Chief Justice and persons who align with her have taken to court have been heard by the Chief Justice's own peers, people of similar standing as her, even if she's the one who superintended them until her suspension. And they say that the cases that she has brought, the cases that others aligned to her have brought, do not have merit. One of the cases was a 3-2 verdict, the other one was a 4-1, and that one was 5-0. I think there was another 5-0 if I'm not mistaken. So on all these occasions, they have rejected her claims. And that actually vindicates the fidelity that President Mahama has kept to the Constitution in this matter. It vindicates the position that President Mahama has adopted in this matter. It shows that the process is above scrutiny. The Council of State itself serves as a certain check. And that's why the Constitution brings in the Council of State, so that the president does not act unilaterally. So even that also vindicates the president's steps in this particular matter and shows that he has abided by the law. So to be honest, it's most unfortunate. Indeed, others have even raised the propriety of the Chief Justice commenting on the matter in the way she did, giving her lofty position.
Are you concerned about that yourself?
Well, of course, every Ghanaian has to be concerned because it would appear on the surface as an egregious violation of the Constitution. The Constitution is clear in Article 1468. Indeed, I am the spokesperson to the president, but have you ever heard me discuss the merits of the case? There's a reason. The reason is that the Constitution says that the processes around this subject must be confidential, and it is binding on all Ghanaians, including the Chief Justice. She, until her suspension, was the chief enforcer of the Constitution. She was the one who used to empanel people to sit on constitutional matters to interpret it. Like all public office holders, she is bound by the dictates of the Constitution. So you would expect that she would have even greater respect for the Constitution than anybody else. And yet she goes public to speak about the contents, the details of petitions, when the Constitution says you cannot do that. So it is a matter that we must examine to see whether it is desirable for that to happen. So in a nutshell, I don't think that there's any question to answer on the part of the president on this matter. And I had to move quickly to reinforce that position before anybody went out there to create some distortions about what the actual facts are.
You're getting closer to 6 months.
Yes.
On July 7, this government will have been exactly 6 months in office. A few moves you are making. The first one I heard this week, you're also a member of parliament.
That is true.
Is the Holiday Act,
That
the
is
new
true.
Holiday Act. You're seeking to abolish the August 4 celebration and make September 21 once again the Founders' Day. Why is it important for you, and how will that really resolve the matter? Because you know when the NPP was in power, they had a different opinion. Would that resolve essentially the disagreement?
Well, first of all, I think that one of the ills of the AKUFO-ADDO administration was the way that they sought to project familial ties and relations. And I, in the past, have had to say that August 4th was nothing more than an attempt to elevate President AKUFO-ADDO's relatives to a certain status that they did not belong to rival Kwame Nkrumah. And that was it. His uncle and his dad and his I think his grandfather, also J.B. Dankwa, Pawile, his uncle, and his dad, Edward AKUFO-ADDO, were direct beneficiaries of that August 4th thing. Because that was the date that the UGTC, which is a political party that transmogrified into the UP and now NPP, was founded. You know, it is a gratuitous abuse of power to advance sectarian interests. And so we were very clear in opposition that there was no way that was going to stand. It is not proper. September 21st is the birthday of Kwame Nkrumah. Universally, he is acknowledged as a preeminent African of his era. In fact, the recently elected mayor of New York is named after Kwame Nkrumah. It attests to the man's greatness. His father was a lecturer at Harvard. That is, the recently named New York mayor, an intellectual of high standing. And yet he named his son after Kwame Nkrumah. So we have a Kwame leading the charge in perhaps the most advanced metropolis in the world. It shows the man's greatness. Need I even say more about Kwame Nkrumah's global standing? So if his birthday is made a holiday, everybody accepts that. There will be no independence without Kwame Nkrumah. That is a fact. It is true that others may have begun the struggle. Indeed, the likes of Yasantua and Co. played their role by standing toe-to-toe against colonial oppression. And she is to be celebrated highly for that brave effort, even when men fled. The likes of Pa Grant, who bankrolled the UGCC with their own finances against colonial domination, are to be acknowledged. And I'm sure that they are duly acknowledged for the roles that they played. But everybody understands that it is incontestable that Nkrumah was the main man as far as independence was concerned. And therefore, if his birthday is acknowledged in that regard, well, you go to Addis Ababa, and Kwame Nkrumah's statue adorns the frontage of the AU head office. It is not for nothing. That statue was sanctioned by the commemoration of the sort that 21st September brings. But August 4th is completely unjustifiable. There's no basis for it. You see, and the NPP must accept, the UP tradition must accept that Kwame Nkrumah beat them to the independence struggle. There's no harm. You can acknowledge the role played by others without attempting to falsify history and give undeserved credit to persons who do not merit that sort of credit. So it was important to rationalize that and restore the proper sequence of events and the true narrative. And also send a signal that this pension of the NPP to push sectarian interest will meet resistance every step of the way. And we told them that that modification they had made would only last as long as they are in power. Once they leave, and you see that this has gained wide acceptance among the Ghanaian population, this change that was done. Because the Ghanaian spirit, the Ghanaian consciousness is aware of the preeminent role of Nkrumah. Nkrumah died decades ago, in 1972. That was 3 years ago. And yet, my children acknowledge him as a preeminent person of his era. People who are 20 years old and beyond, people who are 30 years old and below. If you did a poll today, who will choose Kwame Nkrumah over and above any other Ghanaian leader? And it is not for nothing. They see his handiwork decades after the man left. I didn't meet Kwame Nkrumah. I was born 9 clear years after he died. And yet, I am in no doubt about his standing in Ghanaian society. That alone should tell you what the fact is. And so, it is like swimming against a waterfall, actually. What the NPP is doing is like swimming against the waterfall. There's no way you can go against the flow. That is the flavor of the Ghanaian people. That is the pulse of the Ghanaian people. But it's about time that they respected that. So this had to be done. And I'm sure that it has received the necessary. The other issue too was that we made a promise that we will give an extra holiday to our Muslim brethren in order to bring some balance into the religious festivities that we have. Christians have long had their days. Under President Rawlings, the Islamic holiday was instituted. But we felt that there was a need to extend additional days in order that the full import of that action is realized. And then there was the need to rationalize the days on which holidays fell. If you are not careful, depending on the day that the holiday falls, it may disrupt public life. For instance, 1st July is a Tuesday. We would only have come out of a 2-day weekend interspersed with 1 day, and then the next day we go and sit at home again because it's a holiday. I don't think it's effective utilization of time. So the idea is that any holiday that falls on a weekday will be shifted to the Friday after that, so that then the following day you don't have to come to work again, because there will be no interruptions in the holiday season. So that is what has happened. And I think that these are well thought through ideas.
The Republic Day.
Yes, that has been restored. Again, the NPP decided somehow that what is effectively the most important day in a national life, perhaps aside of the Independence Day, which is 6th March, should not be made a holiday. I don't know the thinking that went into that. How is 4th August more important to our calendar than 1st July? The day that we truly became independent. Because then we were no longer under colonial yoke. The Queen was not the head of state of Ghana. And that we were a full republic. How can such a day be less important to the day that the UGCC was formed? I don't think that that arrangement was tenable and it could withstand scrutiny. And so it is little wonder that the 1st July has been restored as the day that we became a republic, and one that is worth celebrating in the manner that we intend for it to be celebrated.
And it is the day you're doing the prayer and thanksgiving?
That is true.
Why choose that day?
Well, I think that it's first of all, then you don't have to set another day. So you kill two stones with one bird. And also, I think that if we need to give thanks to God, we need to acknowledge where we have come from. So that the day that we became a republic, fully self-governing republic, is a day that we need to thank God for, and all the other blessings that he has brought our way as a nation, despite the challenges that we've had on this journey of nationhood. So that essentially informs why the day was chosen. Yes.
And then coming up, right after that day, 2nd July, you're launching the 24-hour economy.
That is true.
Why hasn't it taken so long for you to put together a policy, a proper policy, and launch it?
Well, I think that policy making has to be deliberate. You see, the NPP suffered from whimsical policy, knee-jerk policy making, and the results were disastrous. It ended up bankrupting our country and taking us through perhaps the most difficult economic period in our nation's history. Now, we promised the 24-hour economy, among other things, to ensure economic expansion, ensure job creation, and leverage competitive advantage that we have. It was a need to think about it properly, put in place proper structures, have proper enabling legislation, so that when it takes off, we don't hamstring ourselves with lack of adequate preparation. Because we need to learn lessons from the experience of others. Indeed, it was Otto von Bismarck, the famous German statesman, who said a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. It is only a fool who learns from his own mistakes. So we've seen governments implement policies without thinking through it properly, and the consequences that it has left us. So we have to do things differently. And that is why we've taken our time to establish proper systems. So when it is launched, you will see that similar activity will follow. Indeed, the Ghana Ports and Harbours Authority has given indication that they are ready to roll out a 24-hour service. And you can imagine the sort of relief that it will bring and how the turnaround time will be reduced for shipping containers, and how people who import items will get it speedily so that they can quickly move on with their lives and their businesses. Indeed, there's an agency under me, the Ghana Publishing Company Limited, that has been running 24 hours for at least a month or two. And this is a publishing house. They have a monopoly over the printing of gazettes. And so any time of the day, you can work in and print your gazette. If you are minded to register your marriage or any other such significant milestone, they are available to do so. They also are into commercial printing. So any time of the day, they will be able to do it, so that they meet timelines. Because time is of the essence. And business people do not joke with their time. And so if services are offered in a way that allows people to meet timelines and do things quickly, it will only inure to our benefit as a country. Also, through that, you will require more hands. And so it creates opportunity to employ more of our youth who have suffered unemployment for quite some time. So it is all well and good. And we believe that once it is launched, Ghanaians will see the benefits that accrue from same.
How big a deal is it to the government, and how strategic is it to what you intend to achieve within the last 4 years?
Oh, it is. You recall that the 24-hour economy was perhaps the standout policy proposition in the whole of the 2024 campaign. Everybody was talking about it. Civil society embraced it. Trade union leaders embraced it. The business community were excited about it. And in the process of rolling it out, we've engaged all sections of Ghanaian society. Indeed, only a day or two ago, the 24-hour economy team led by Mr. GOV'T were in Parliament to brief the Speaker and present him with the policy document. In fact, before Parliament rose in the last sitting, he was in Parliament to brief MPs about progress made in implementing the 24-hour economy. The President himself has hosted a stakeholders engagement right in this Jubilee House to achieve the buy-in and bring industry, business, commerce, and what have you, all stakeholders who have any and anything to do with this 24-hour economy on board. And therefore, you see that we have been deliberate and careful in the way that we've rolled it out. So that when it is rolled out, you won't face some of the implementation challenges that other programs face because of the lack of adequate preparation. But it is a very significant step. We envisage that it will transform the Ghanaian economy. It will make us a bit more export-oriented. And you notice that alongside this has been the Accelerated Export Development Committee, with the president himself, and the president doesn't chair many committees. Indeed, apart from the National Security Council and Cabinet, the president chairs. So if the president chairs a committee, then you know that it is a very big deal and that he means business. And so we expect that flowing from the steps that have been taken so far, the objective of the 24-hour economy will be achieved. That is economic expansion, employment creation, the modernization of our economy, and making that an export-oriented economy as opposed to an import-dependent one. And you know that it has implications on economic development. It has implications on the strength of our currency and stability of same, which has been a major difficulty in our economic development as a country. Yeah.
And I'll come to the matter of the city. Yeah. But before that, tied to the 24-hour economy is the matter of power.
Yes.
And recently, one of the biggest discussions we've had, in fact, your colleagues in Parliament on the NPP side actually think you should have withdrawn it altogether, has been that levy, the 1% increase in the ESSRL levy that you were going to implement before what happened with Iran and Israel did happen. Now that there seems to be a ceasefire, would we be seeing a return of the levy? Because it seems that's the directive from
I think that the decision makers would evaluate the situation, assess the situation, and see what time is best to introduce the levy. The whole idea of the levy is to ensure that we generate resources to take care of one of the most constraining factors in electricity production, that is liquid fuels. Of course, it is more desirable, more economically beneficial to generate electricity with gas. But we don't have enough gas to be able to power all the thermal plants, which have become the most significant contributor to power generation in terms of that's thermal energy. And therefore, we are compelled to import fuel. Now, fuel is quite expensive. About $1.2 billion of it is required. And then there's also capacity charges, which essentially means that entities that enable us have capacity to generate electricity need to be compensated so that the investment they made does not become an albatross around their neck. It is a fair arrangement. Now, for some reason, the AKUFO-ADDO administration decided that these two important factors of production should not be added to the tariff. So the tariff you and I pay is devoid of anything that enables the power generators recoup the investment they make in purchasing fuel and then keeping the plants running. And it was leading to a situation where it was no longer sustainable because it was piling on debts for ECG, which already, because of their own poor management practices of the past, had been carrying huge debt. Currently, they are facing a debt of between 67 to 70 billion Ghana cedis, which is huge. And their business, their operation model was not sustainable. You cannot sell electricity for a price that is cheaper than what it costs you to produce it. It is not your station. If your production cost, the cost of running your station becomes higher than how much revenue you earn, you will no longer exist for an extended period of time. Immediately, your owners will take a decision to close you down because then you will become a burden. At the very least, you need to break even. You must meet your cost. Then a case can be made that, okay, we may not be making profit, but at least we are not incurring debts. So maybe let's say we are serving a public good and it is self-sustaining. But it is not self-sustaining the way that the electricity arrangements are. So it was necessary to introduce this levy so that at least half of the cost of buying fuel is met. So we envisage about $500 million within this period to be able to at least take half of that burden, because it means that government then has to look for the additional money. And doing that means that pressure then is brought to bear on other sectors. But then we have to take from other sectors. And there's only so much that government can do in that regard. So yes, it is not an easy decision. It wasn't taken lightly. It was well considered. And we also thought that the gains that the city has made had given opportunity for fuel price to drop significantly. Indeed, there's almost 12 cedis drop in the price of a gallon of fuel between the beginning of this year and now. Indeed, only last week, some oil marketing companies, because of competition, reduced their price to below 11 cedis. There were some who were selling it around 10 cedis. And if you compare it to around the 15 cedis that oil fuel was selling for That is a drop of what? 5 cedis a litre, which will translate to almost 20 cedis a gallon. So 20 cedis a gallon is a significant saving. And because of that, you've seen the impact on transport fares. It has reduced by 15%, which also means that goods and services will have to reduce because transportation costs has reduced. And indeed, already, there's evidence of reduction of prices on the market. Indeed, GOV'T and other trade associations have promised to do further reductions early next month to reflect the actual position of prices. So we thought that given that window of opportunity that had been created, it was a good time to introduce a levy to minimize the impact, because we are concerned about the impact it will have on Ghanaians. Just as we were about to introduce it, then this unfortunate escalation of tensions between Israel and Iran emerged. And as a responsible government, we needed to pause and evaluate the situation and see whether that conflict was going to generate additional pressures on oil prices. Fortunately, the conflict has ended, and it does not appear that that anticipated pressure was brought to bear. It does not appear that there was any significant increase in crude oil price. Indeed, I'm hearing that there may even be reductions, which then gives opportunity for the levy to come in a manner that does not impose difficulty on the people of Ghana. So the evaluation is being carried, the assessment is being made, and at the appropriate time, the relevant authorities will engage to indicate the way forward.
It seems very important to the president that any action he takes does not worsen the plight of the Ghanaian, because there are those who feel if it is about power, some sacrifices would definitely have to be made, but you're still cautious enough not to ask too much of the Ghanaian. Why is that important?
It is necessary because one of the reasons why we won in that spectacular fashion at the polls was that there was simply too much action. The NPP's economic policies were disastrous. They were inimical to the interests of the Ghanaian. They pushed Ghanaians into unprecedented levels of hardships. Indeed, there's a report that I always refer to, which is heartbreaking, that at a point in our country, 8.5 million Ghanaians went to bed without having eaten the whole day. That is a quarter of our population. It's an unacceptable statistic. Unacceptable. It is the height of governmental failure for that to happen. The cost of living went through the roof. At a point, inflation was 54%. The cedi had lost 54% of its value at some point. Inflation was spiraling. And prices, you go to the market in the morning, and the price you get when you return in the afternoon is higher than it was in the morning. So it was not a sustainable situation. In addition to this, they introduced the DDEP, which pushed over 1 million people within the Ghanaian middle class into hardships. So it was little wonder that they were booted out in the ignominious fashion that they were booted out. It also meant then that Ghanaians are giving clear indication that they were not going to countenance policies that lead to hardships. So it was our responsibility, and we made a firm commitment to reduce this hardship. So one of the things that we said we would do was to remove the e-levy, the emissions levy, the betting tax that had become a problem for many Ghanaian youth, and also take steps to stabilize the currency in order to ensure that its contribution to price volatility was neutralized. So you've seen that since we've been in power, the cedi has gained strength. It has changed against the dollar for about 16 cedis when we came into power. And I know because I did transactions just before we entered government. So I knew that was the level of the cedi. Today, the interbank rate is 10.29 or so, or slightly higher on the forex market. Certainly much lower than it was under the NPP. That also brings relief to the economy because we are largely import dependent. So imports become cheaper. And when imports are cheaper, importers are compelled to reduce their prices. Of course, a case could be made for further price reductions. And it is an ongoing engagement, and we expect that prices will drop further. But at the moment, everybody can attest that the cost of living is not as high as it was under the NPP. And the reason being that we've managed the exchange rate in a manner that has brought significant relief to businesses. So those who import items don't need to find the same amount of cedis to do importation of the same amount of products. And it is clear all over the market how prices have dropped. I don't need to reiterate that. So that falls in line with our commitment to reduce hardships through proper economic management, prudent economic management. How has the cedi gained this strength? Because there's an institutional arrangement. The GOV'T arrangement ensures that we export gold and earn significant quantities of foreign exchange. And in the last 4 or 5 months, about $4 billion has flowed in from gold exports. In the past, that did not used to be the case. In the past, the NPP was concerned about boosting the reserves of the Bank of Ghana. But you see, the reserves of the Bank of Ghana, gold reserves, they sit in the Bank of England vaults in London. What it does is to assure investors that if we were in need of dollars, they could quickly sell some and attain liquidity to settle commitments to them. That's all I did. Okay. But beyond that, you need to have foreign exchange on the Ghanaian market for importers. Gold reserves don't achieve that. So now, because of the inflow of foreign exchange, which is consistent, sustainable over the medium to long term, people have confidence that if they are looking for dollars, they will find it. And that's the reason why. And the dollar is like any other commodity. It is sold. So what you pay for a dollar is the price of the currency. And when there's scarcity, people put premiums on the little that is left. When there's abundance, a premium won't work, because if he comes to where the price is too high, he will go to the next vendor who will find him some at a cheaper rate. So that is what has happened. And that is why the CD has gained that level of strength and it has translated into a reduction in price. So it is a part of our commitment to reducing the burden that Ghanaians have. Because the Ghanaian people have suffered. Their last 8 years were terrible under the NPP. There was no breathing space. And the policies got harsher and harsher and harsher by the day. We are minded to take a different route to bring relief to the people of Ghana.
One thing on the city, the president seems, and in government, it seems there's been an agreement that there's a need to make sure that this management does not unnecessarily reduce the price of this dollar to the city. Because there seems to be that agreement that you should stay between 10 and 11.
Well, I think that the Bank of Ghana has clarified that they themselves, they are not imposing any band. Okay. We operate a liberalized exchange rate market, okay, which is driven primarily by demand and supply forces. But the management also has to be such that exporters don't suffer. Okay. Because they may have invested funds into the production of their goods at a time when the exchange rate was at a certain level. So if it drops precipitously to a certain point, it undermines their profits and it could really upend their businesses. So there's a need to achieve a balance that makes the cost of living bearable for the people of Ghana, whilst also ensuring that other players in the economy don't suffer unduly. So that is what the president meant when he said that he believes that the CD will hover within a certain range. But ultimately, it will be nowhere near the terrible levels that it was under the NPP.
Because there are people who have the opinion that pushing it further, if what you're doing, continue doing what you're doing, you can push it further below 10 cities.
A natural progression. If it goes there, it should be because that is a natural order of things. As I said, it's demand and supply. Once supply improves, the price will go down. Okay. But by that time, other players would have adjusted. And then they will not be worse off. But it will not be artificial. It has to be natural because of the availability of it. That is how it should be. That is how other countries keep their currencies stable. So that is what we intend to achieve.
We're going to 6 months, you must be excited about perhaps the gains you're making in the economy. Inflation, spending down, the exchange rate, that affects everything. Fuel prices are falling. You must be excited. But there's one other area where a lot of questions will be asked is, how well are you doing with food production?
Well, we are encouraged by the gains that we've made. It shows that hard work can achieve results. And we are minded to work even harder to stay true to the commitments we made to the people of Ghana. Of course, we want food prices to fall because it's the most important commodity. Indeed, when you get money, the first thing you think about is what to eat. All other things can wait until you have satisfied your hunger pangs, right? So it is extremely important. And indeed, under the Agriculture for Economic Development Program, which the Ministry of Agriculture is spearheading, we intend to ensure that we invest significant funds into agriculture. And in the budget, an initial 1.5 billion Ghana cedis was allocated to that program. Under that program, policies that would ensure the availability of food, that will ensure that the poultry sector is developed and enhanced, that will ensure that the farmer is not worse off, and that will ensure that food prices remain within affordable range for the people of Ghana. There are a number of very exciting things that the Ministry of Agric is coming up with. We promised the agric mechanization policy. We said we will do farming services centers where the requisite agricultural equipment and inputs would be available for deployment into farms, and agreements reached with farmers to ensure that they are able to afford such services which are necessary and vital towards increasing their yield. That is a project that the Agri Ministry is working on, and very, very soon they will engage the people of Ghana to update them on the progress. There's also the famous AKUFO-ADDO, which turned out to be perhaps the most loved agriculture promise, even though our opponents attempted to do mischief with the president's description. That one too, I'm aware that the Agri Ministry has made significant headway, and very soon they will announce some gains that have been made in that regard. The idea is to improve the poultry sector using unconventional means. So if Ghanaian families are able to raise poultry, even in small quantities, and you aggregate them, you see that we would be able to increase demand significantly so that we don't have to rely on imports. In this day and age, it makes absolutely no sense to import poultry. Why? We can't rear chicken in Ghana. That is a national embarrassment. And therefore, there's a need to do something about it urgently. And that is what the NPP project is aimed at. In addition to other incentives that we'll give to mainstream poultry operators to enhance their business so that they are also able to compete effectively in the market. Yes.
Well, two things. First, are you still... we realize that there's not a lot of talk about cessation activities in Western Togoland since you came to power. There was a lot of troop movements, among others, towards the Volta regime because the former administration which you took over from felt that those activities threaten the state that Ghana is. Are you not concerned about it?
Well, we are concerned about anything that hinders Ghana's security or undermines Ghana's security. Indeed, the first and foremost responsibility of every government is to secure Ghana's territorial integrity. Indeed, if you don't do anything at all as a government, as for that you must do. Okay. So we are concerned about any activity that poses a threat to the safety and security of the people of Ghana. So whatever steps have to be taken to guarantee that security will be taken. And in power, we've rolled out a number of measures to step up security in the face of recent threats that have emerged. And our security architecture will be molded to ensure that it responds to contemporary security needs. And if there has been a downward trend in a certain threat or activity that existed, it can only go to show that whatever strategies and systems have been put in place are yielding fruits without getting into details, because often these things are done in a manner that ensures that people who are not authorized to know do not know. Yeah.
I'm talking specifically about Western Togoland.
Yes, but it is one of our responsibilities as a government that if there's some difficulty on our eastern front, we pay attention to. So without going into detail and singling out groups or individuals, I would say that whatever security agreements have to be made to secure all our borders and secure all Ghanaians who live within the state of Ghana will be deployed. If one of the outcomes is that a previous skirmish, or if you like, tiff, with this group has died down, then we are all the better for it as a country.
Yeah. And then finally, you are Minister for Government Communication.
That is true.
In fact, for those of us who are in the broadcasting industry, part of our activities falls under, in fact, they give us the spectrum to operate. Minister for Communication.
Yes.
You, when we have problems with press freedom, we come to you now. I realize that the president rarely makes these kinds of interventions, but that intervention was very swift. A few hours after it has been announced, the president directs that give them some more time when it comes to the issue of radio stations that were in violation of the regulations governing their frequencies and everything. What was that important to the president?
You know that the president, since his emergence in Ghanaian politics, has cultivated an image of a supporter of press freedom. And in all the offices that he has occupied, he has lent significant support to the media. He's accessible and open to the media. And therefore, he will be the last to impose any form of hardship or restriction on the practice of media operators in our country. The fact is that the 64 stations that had their authorization suspended were indeed in breach of laid down regulations and laws. And so the action itself was justified lawfully. It was about, there was nothing that could be said against it in terms of its legality. That must be placed on record. However, the president was of the view that there are times when you need to adopt another approach to resolving the same issue. Because ultimately, these are stations that had operated for, some of them had been around for quite some time. And if you suspend the authorization, the implication is that they have to reapply. And it is entirely possible that they won't get the same frequency that they used to operate on. If you do that, you've literally completely dismembered that whole setup. Because it will take them a lot of time and resources to gain the sort of traction that they had on their previous frequency. And so the sanctions were quite steep. So the president felt that, well, maybe some clemency had to be given to afford the stations the opportunity to regularize their operations so that they don't fall foul of those regulations. The president was also minded by our recent history. Your station itself was unduly and unfairly attacked by the AKUFO-ADDO administration simply because you took dissenting views on their policies and you held them to account strictly. Many people believe that that action that was taken against you, the withdrawal of your authorization, was motivated by political considerations and nothing more, because the so-called violation was something that could be resolved. In any event, it was restored after 5 years. So what was it that happened after 5 years that could not have happened in the immediate aftermath of the action that was taken? So for an established station like yours, one of the oldest we have, to have been treated in that way was most regrettable. Indeed, we condemned it widely and roundly in opposition. The President Mama was very clear in his condemnation of the mistreatment that you suffered, together with others. And so why should we come to power and do the very thing that we opposed or condemned? That would make the president appear inconsistent. And so he thought that, no, yes, the people had fallen foul of the law, they were in breach of clear provisions, but if something could be done about it, let us do it and give them an opportunity to. If after that period of clemency, the stations remain recalcitrant and they don't do what they have to do, then nobody can say that they have been targeted, because everybody would appreciate that they were given enough opportunity to rectify whatever anomalies led to the suspension of the authorization. So that is what informed the president's view. It is not that he was encouraging lawlessness or goading stations on to disregard the need for compliance with regulation. Regulatory compliance is absolutely necessary to sanitize the space and ensure that persons who or entities that respect Ghanaian law have the opportunity to operate. But we must do it in a way that does not impose excessive difficulty on media operators, some of whom are genuinely struggling because of the state of that space. We know the difficulties that stations face. It is not as lucrative as it appears. And we are fully aware of this. So we will be the last to impose additional burdens on you by withdrawing authorizations when there are opportunities to rectify whatever gaps may have existed. Yes.
Well, I said finally, but I realized the president is was recently at the GOV'T.
That is true.
The Vaccine Alliance. The health minister is not in town. The finance minister is not in town. The president himself. But I'm sure you've heard about the reports of the re-emergence of COVID.
That is true.
In some, is this something that worries the government, and what will happen? What would we see happen?
Of course, knowing the harm that COVID caused and the deaths and the illnesses that it caused, government is concerned about any re-emergence of the pandemic. And therefore, already I've seen a statement put out by the Ghana Health Service to draw attention to this and provide guidelines for people to avoid contracting COVID. But the situation is being monitored, and as and when specific action has to be taken, they will be announced. Fortunately, now we know a lot more about the disease than we did when it first emerged. And so the lessons learned would apply, or will be applied in the way that it is managed if it becomes necessary to do so. So the public can rest assured that government is in full control of the situation, and we will take every necessary step to prove them against this disease and ensure that it does not devastate our healthcare system as it did when it first emerged.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much
the pleasure is all mine.
For welcoming us into your office.
The pleasure is all
and for
mine.
talking to us.
The pleasure is
Thank
mine,
you.
Senna. Yeah. All right. Okay.